My name is Linda Halloran. I am the Community Engagement Manager with Town and Country Federal Credit Union. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight for what's the second of a two-part virtual workshop on getting a leg up, preparing, planning, and affording higher education. We all know that paying for college after high school or higher education after high school can be expensive, and the cost continues to rise. Plus, we have learned that many young people finish their educations only to be buried in student loan debt. And this debt is certainly getting in the way of them starting off on their adult lives and being able to do things like rent their own apartment, buy a car, and so much more. But tonight we're going to talk about some of the steps that families can take before high school to make affording education after high school a little bit easier and a little bit more affordable. To provide strategies and insights into the college planning process, Town and Country has teamed up with the Finance Authority of Maine, or FAME, and invited two of their experts on the topic here tonight. So let's get started, and I'll introduce our speakers. First, we're going to hear from Mary Dyer. Mary has worked in higher education for over 20 years, assisting students and families with planning, saving, and paying for college. She's currently the Financial Education Program Manager for FAME and provides college access, financial education, debt management services, and training to Maine parents, their children, as well as the professionals who support them. Mary also serves as the president of the Maine Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy, which is a nonprofit volunteer-based organization dedicated to improving financial capabilities of Maine children and young adults. Mary's joined by Mila Tappan. Mila is FAME's Manager of College Access and Outreach and is a FAFSA expert, working with parents, students, and education professionals that support them on completing the FAFSA process, preparing to pay for college. Before joining FAME, Mila worked as the Associate Director of Financial Aid at the University of Maine for more than 15 years. So she's got a lot of experience working with families kind of in the college setting, as well as through planning and from the high school level. Let's welcome Mary Dyer and Mila Tappan.
So it is wonderful to have you all here with us tonight. We are so excited to talk about financial aid. I know that's not always the most exciting topic to everyone in the world, but we get really excited about it because we think that the earlier that you start thinking about this and talking about this and coming to events like this, the easier it is going to be to manage paying for higher education when your students get to be that age. A lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is really going to focus on what families and students can do when students are in high school and really starting to think about where they want to go to school. So a lot of the focus tonight will be on how to search for schools and then once they're actually seniors, how to make decisions about where to attend. Not that it's all about the money, but we do think that that is certainly an important consideration. So what we're going to share tonight, we think will get you started, but we want you to know that FAME is always here as a resource. So we're here tonight, but we're here and available, throughout the whole experience that you are going to be undertaking, whether it be additional webinars, phone calls, emails, we have a texting list, whatever we can do to support you through this journey is what we're here for. So in our session in March, so some of you might have been with us in March, and Mary's sharing the link to the March recording, we talked about getting financially prepared, about having that conversation so that students and parents are on the same page, because that's incredibly important, and how financial aid works and the benefits of savings. We are always trying to debunk that myth that saving for higher education is not a good thing to do because it messes with your financial aid eligibility. That is simply not the case. So every chance we get, we want to say that saving for higher education is a really, really good thing. And again, getting financially prepared. So if you wanted to go back and check out that recording, we think that would be great because these really are two sessions that one builds on the other. So if you can do that, that's super. Tonight, we're going to focus on building a list of schools that will help ensure that there are really good options available to the student when they're in their senior year, the time we are at right now for current high school seniors, and families are trying to make that decision as to where the student is going to attend. We want to be sure that there are many options available so that students can focus on some things beyond financial aid when they're making their decisions. It's all about having the best options available. So tonight we're going to talk about how to build that list of schools, some resources available to do that research. And then Mary will pick it up and talk about how to compare financial aid offers and how to finance the remaining portion of the bill that might not be covered by financial aid. So we all know the importance of researching schools based on what academic programs they offer. A lot of students are researching schools based on where they're located. They want to be in a particular location for a whole variety of reasons. You know, some are researching schools based on the size. They want a bigger school or they want a smaller school. There's all sorts of things that people think about when researching schools to build that list. One of the things that is also critical to think about, though, is researching schools from a financial aid perspective. Mary and I are never going to say that every student should go to the school that's the least expensive school, because the goal is we want students to find schools that are going to be a good fit for them academically, socially, but also financially. And so this is a piece that sometimes gets missed, is really doing that research early on to make sure that when you get down to the schools that the student is looking at, there are some good, affordable options available. Schools vary dramatically in both the types of aid that they offer and the amount of aid that they offer. That is why researching schools is so important. In the perfect world, if every school gave the student everything they needed, we wouldn't have to talk about finances. But the reality is that some schools have a lot more money than other schools. And so that's why talking about this and thinking about this is so important. When we talk about financial aid, there are two broad categories of financial aid. There's merit-based aid and there's need-based aid. So the merit-based aid is the aid a student is eligible to receive based on who they are as an individual, typically based on their academic performance. So many students will find that when they apply for admission at a particular school, they may be offered admission, and in with their admissions letter is something that says, congratulations, we'd like to offer you a scholarship. And that's based on, again, the student's academic performance. There are some athletic scholarships out there that are kind of considered merit-based because they're based on who the student is and what they bring to the table. And there are also individual characteristics that a student might have that a school really wants. So for example, there might be a student who's a fabulous trombone player. My oldest son had a roommate who was a great trombone player. At his school, that was a really important thing. It was a music school. So they offered him merit-based aid just based on his trombone playing ability. So merit-based aid is a very important type of financial aid, and it depends on the school what they offer. So tonight we're going to be focused more on need-based aid, but I wanted to mention merit aid because that is one of the things that you're going to want to talk with schools about as you're researching them and finding out what types of merit aid they have available. Because believe it or not every school does have merit aid. So that conversation is going to be very important to have. And that's a conversation that you typically would have with the admissions office. The other type of aid is need-based aid. And this is the financial aid that is offered based on a family's need that is determined based on filling out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and possibly an additional form, maybe the CSS profile. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and all schools use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal financial aid, for state financial aid, and many schools use it to determine eligibility for all of the need-based aid that they have available. And these are the types of funds that are awarded by the financial aid office. There are some schools out there that have, usually it's schools that have a lot more financial resources, that will say, hey, you know, we have to use the FAFSA for determining federal financial aid and state financial aid. But when it comes to our own money, we want to know a little bit more about the family. So they may require a form like the CSS profile. It's very common in the Northeast if they want more information to use that form. So one of the things when researching schools is you want to be sure you know what forms are required to apply for financial aid. The FAFSA is a given. Absolutely everyone should fill out the FAFSA. but the CSS profile may be required, especially if you look at schools in the Boston area. The only schools in Maine that require the CSS profile are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. Both of these applications become available on October 1st of senior year. So depending on where your student is currently, if you have a junior, for example, then it is going to be October 1st is that critical day when both of those applications are going to become available. And that's the case every single year. When a family fills out those applications, the end result of those applications is something called an EFC, or an expected family contribution. So it takes all of that information, puts it through the formula, and the output is this EFC. And then schools use that EFC to determine how much need-based aid the student is going to be eligible to receive. So how is financial need calculated? In reality, it's a really simple calculation that all schools use. What a school does is they take the cost of attendance. So when schools are talking about how much it costs to attend a particular institution, they're looking at tuition and fees, but also room and board and books and supplies, even travel expenses and other miscellaneous expenses. So sometimes when you see that big number out there about the cost of attendance, keep in mind that it often incorporates all of those different types of expenses, because those are part of going to college. Those are part of attending an institution of higher education. So schools are going to take their cost of attendance, which is going to vary by school, and they're going to subtract your EFC from that. And that is how they are going to determine how much need you have. So for example, at a lower cost school, think maybe one of the community colleges, you might have a cost of attendance of $9,600. Your EFC is $6,000, assuming that's based on the FAFSA, what the end result was of filing the FAFSA. So the need at that school is going to be $3,600. Let's say your student is also applying to a mid-cost school, maybe one of our state universities. And so let's say their cost of attendance is more like $23,500. Your EFC is the same, regardless of which school you're looking to or applying to, the EFC remains the same. So we're going to subtract that same $6,000 out, and that school is going to determine that you have a need of about $17,500. What about a higher cost school? So I've used $65,000 here. In reality, we know that there are schools well over $70,000 per year. Again, your EFC is the same, but at that school, your need is going to be almost $59,000 or about $59,000, okay? So why we want to demonstrate this and to talk about this is because if we live in a perfect world where a school fills all of your students' need, then you would only have to come up with your EFC. So I would love to think that we could get to a point where every school was able to fill all of the need that your student has. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. Okay? The reality is that some schools, just like some families, have a lot more money than others. But every school starts with this calculation, and every school will determine how much need your student has, and then will do their best to fill that need. So when researching schools, we really want you to focus on the net price, not the sticker price. So when we see that there are schools out there that are costing $70,000 a year, we don't want people to say, oh my gosh, no way, that school should never be on our list. Because what you really want to focus on is how much is that school after grants and scholarships that are awarded by that school. And so most of the time, students are going to be eligible for something, and it's going to bring that price down very, very dramatically in some cases. So one of the things that we have found here in Maine, and we have so many great institutions, but Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin that we know are very high cost schools, at least when we look at sticker price, end up being some of the most affordable schools, especially for our lowest income students. So please never write off a school because of the sticker price. Instead, focus on the net price. And so we're going to provide some tools tonight to help you figure out what the net price of a school might be for you or your student. Another place we'd love to have you start to do some research on schools is the college scorecard. And you can see the link there to that website. That is the U.S. Department of Education's website. And it's where you can see all of the various colleges out there, 2-year, 4-year schools. and you can search for them. You can search based on a whole different types of criteria. And what it's going to do is even allow you to compare those schools based on the criteria that you're looking at. One of the reasons I did include this particular site is because they have something that I can't find anywhere else, which is they actually have median earnings. So that can be interesting sometimes to know that, okay, students who attend this school tend to make pretty good money after they graduate. Not surprising. I wonder if any of you can guess one of the schools in Maine that has the highest earnings for their graduates out of college. Maine Maritime Academy. Okay, so I think we've all kind of heard about them on the news and the fact that their students do very well financially when they leave school. So that's the only place I've been able to find that particular piece of data. I'm going to share another website in just a moment. When you use the college scorecard site, you are going to see that they are going to talk about the average annual cost. That is same as net price. So what they show is the average annual cost is the cost for the average student at those schools minus the grants and scholarships that those students are receiving. So again, great place to start searching for some schools. But what I'd really love to have you all do is to focus on something called the percent of need met. So a moment ago, we talked about how you calculate need or how a school calculates need. They take the cost of attendance, they subtract out your EFC, and that's how much need you have. So what we hope for is that schools can meet 100% of that need. But as I've mentioned, not all schools are able to do that. But the good news is you can actually find what percent of need each school meets on average. And not only can you find out what that percent of need met is, you can search for schools based on the percent of need that they meet. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the most important criteria. Mary and I talk all the time with students and families about they've got to find a school where they can be successful academically and they can complete their education. That is the ultimate goal, is to get that degree and to get that education. But at the same time, hey, if they can find a school, there's so many schools out there, and if they can find a school that really works well for them academically and is more affordable, that's the best case scenario. So what you can do is you can go to the Big Future site. So this is part of the College Board site. A lot of you are probably familiar with the College Board. They're the SAT people, the AP people, but they also have a really great college search site. This is my favorite one. Like I said, the other one that I shared, I like that one piece of information that I can't find anywhere else, but this is my favorite place to search for schools. What they do is they have all of these schools in their database. And then based on the criteria that is important to you, it filters those almost 5,000 schools down to a manageable number that meet, again, the criteria that you want to look at and to focus on. So when you go to their site, what you're going to see is you first will start by selecting one of these 4 criteria that you want to use to start to narrow your schools and to focus in on a group of schools. So let's just say we picked major. And let's just say we picked environmental science. We wanted to see what schools in the database have a major in environmental science. And what it did is it took the almost 5,000 schools and it brought it down to 606 schools. So filtered it down to those 606 schools. So that's great. And then once we get to that point, then we see that we've got some additional criteria here. We started with just 4, but now we have more, one of which is affordability. So when you click on affordability, what you're going to see is that it has financial need met. So what you can do is you can select schools, again, and this is how you're going to filter and only have schools that meet this criteria left, that meet 100% of need, or schools that meet 90% or more, or 75% or more, okay? So what you can do is you can do a combination of things. So you might say, hey, based on this particular major, I want to find some schools, but I really want to start with schools that meet at least 90% of need. They're going to fill at least 90% of my need on average, okay? And we all know how averages work, but that's a really good way to start to ensure that your student has a group of schools on their list that at least on average seem to do a pretty good job meeting their students' needs. So that's one way to kind of get started and get some schools on the list that seem like they could potentially be a good fit. Once you've done that, then you can dig in even deeper. So there is something called a net price calculator. So several years ago, probably we're almost at 10 years ago now, to be honest, the federal government started requiring all schools that have federal financial aid to have something called a net price calculator. And you are going to find that that net price calculator is usually in the financial aid section, although I have seen it in different places. So sometimes the easiest thing to do is to start right off on the home page, and in the search box, type in net price calculator. What a net price calculator does is it uses that school's specific data. It looks at that school's financial aid dollars that are available and how they award those dollars. And then it asks you, the student and family, to provide some basic information, very similar to some of the questions asked on the FAFSA. So they take their financial data, they use your financial aid data, and they estimate what you specifically would be eligible to receive that first year of school. Now, it is an estimate, so I really, really want to stress that. We never want people to make decisions based on a net price calculator, but it can really help get a good sense of, geez, what would that really look like in reality? And it's, I like starting with percent of need met, but that's much more of an average. This allows you to use your specific information at a specific school to get that estimate. So let's take a look at a net price calculator for two schools where we've used exactly the same financial situation. In this case, let's imagine a family that earns $75,000 a year. There are 4 people in the family. Let's say there's, 2 parents and 2 kids, one of whom's going to be in college. Okay, so same information being used. And I'm not picking on any schools here. I picked 2 schools that I hear a lot. I think the day I did it, to be honest with you, I'd worked with families that had talked about both of these schools. I never want to do main ones. So school A, what I did here is I ran the net price calculator. I put the information they requested into it, and here is the output. So one of the things that makes the whole financial aid process a little bit interesting is that different schools share different information and make information easier or maybe a little bit more challenging to find sometimes. So that's one of the things you're going to find is that every website is going to look different, and the information that schools put out is going to look a little bit different. That's why we talk about how do you compare all of these things. So what I did here is, first of all, I wanted to get a sense of what this school costs. So I found the direct cost. So tuition, fees, room and board is what we consider to be the direct costs, which was also listed as the cost of attendance, which gets a little bit confusing because I talked about cost of attendance, including all of those other things. Okay. Room and board, books and supplies, travel, miscellaneous. But let's just go with that 61,000. And so we can see here that they estimate that the student would get a merit scholarship, again, awarded through the admissions office. Typically, they'd be eligible for some need-based grants. So they'd offer the student, they're estimating, 27,000 in grants and scholarships. So we want to focus again on that net price. So we took the direct cost. I actually put in just this data here. This is not showing on the website. I took the direct cost. I subtracted out the grants and scholarships. And so the estimated net price would be just under $35,000. What I did with school B was exactly the same thing. I looked at the direct cost. You'll notice that they actually included costs, but I wanted to look at just direct tuition, fees, and room and board. I subtracted out their grants and scholarships, merit scholarship of 20,000 and a need-based grant of over 21,000 for a total of 41,338. So the net price estimated at this school is $17,616. We use the exact same financial information for the family, but you can see the financial aid offer is very different from one school to another. Now, again, I don't want anyone making decisions based on a net price calculator, but what this says to me is, okay, school A might be, really at the top of my students list, but that's going to be a stretch financially. So I want to be sure that there are other schools that are on that list that might come in with financial aid that's a little bit better, still meets their criteria, still offers their program and has all of those other things. But we just want to be sure that students have a list of schools that can really meet their needs. Oftentimes, and I think any of us can do this, we know what we want, or we know what we think we want. And students and families get focused in on one particular school. And we really try to avoid that when we're going through this process. So I would never again want anyone to make a final decision based on net price. But I do think it's a piece of information that can be really helpful in that early part of researching schools. One of the things that's a bit challenging is that MeritAid can make a significant difference. So MeritAid, again, is the aid that's typically offered by the admissions office that has nothing to do with the family's financial situation, but instead has to do with the student's usually academic history in high school. Did you know that not all schools offer MeritAid? I did not realize this even after working in financial aid for almost 16 years. It wasn't until my oldest son went to college, which was now several years ago, that some of his friends were also applying to colleges, and some of them were getting into the most elite schools, and they didn't offer any merit aid. All of those schools only offered need-based aid. But what I've also learned through this process is that it's those schools that are the next tier down that tend to have the best merit aid. So those schools want to get those top-notch students. They want those students who could get into, these most selective schools. And so one of the ways that they can do that is they can say, hey, those most selective schools are great, but if you're a family that has some resources and you're solely relying on need-based aid, there's no merit aid at some of those schools. We'll give you merit aid, and we'll give you, we saw at that last example, $20,000 in a merit scholarship. So one of the things that we recommend that families do is, even if your student really only wants to look at those most selective schools, it's a really good idea to have some of the schools that are in that very selective or selective category. And on the College Board website, you can actually, that's a piece of criteria that you can use to search for schools. It literally, you can search only for most selective, or you can search for very selective, or you can search for just selective. So we really recommend broadening that search to include some of those schools, because those tend to be the schools that have the best merit aid. So students who are strong academically will find that those schools sometimes will become much more affordable because of that merit aid. I wish that there was a place where we could go and just say, hey, if you go here, here's a list of which schools have the best merit aid. That list does not exist. Schools are very proprietary about how they award merit aid, and they don't like to share a lot of details about their merit aid. But we do have some, if you ever want to follow up, we do have some ways that we can kind of backdoor it. So please let me know if you've ever liked to talk about that. So we just want to be sure, again, that if you did the net price calculator, the estimated award wasn't that great, that you broaden that search a little bit and look at some different schools. We recommend looking at applying to at least 4 to 6 schools. Now, it's not a case where I would say, if 4 to 6 is good, 14 to 16 is better, because you do want this to be manageable. And when students apply, I saw a student the other, probably 2 months ago that I was talking to, applied to over 20 schools. I think that's excessive. It's very easy to do an admissions application to a lot of schools because of the common application, but you still really want to rein that in a bit, because then there's the financial aid process as well, and there's all the follow-up for all of those schools. So I think 4 to 6, maybe up to 10, depending on your student, is a good number to make sure that there are choices and options available, but that you're not completely overwhelmed. Families should try really hard, as I was mentioning, not to get their heart set on one specific school, especially if you do the net price calculator and it doesn't look like a school that's going to have super good financial aid and might be out of reach financially. And then we also want to be sure that students always apply to a financial aid safety school. We talk about that from an academic perspective. Have that school that you're sure your student can get into on the list. We always want to be sure that there's a school that, even if the financial aid isn't great, there's a way that the family can make that work. So that's a really important thing to think of too, as you're building that list of schools. So I'm going to pass it off to Mary now. So we built the list of schools, your students gone through the application process, and she's going to pick it up from here. And she's just going to tell me when to advance.
Thank you, Mila. All right, so we're going to pretend that we're going to fast forward, and you've done all of the research and you've built your list, and the student has gone through the application process, has been accepted for admission, and now they're starting to receive their financial aid offers. So we've kind of done a quick fast forward. Just to let you know, there are a number of resources and presentations that FAME has where we do a deep dive into the FAFSA completion process and the financial aid application process. So certainly I would take a look at the information on our website, in particular the FAFSA section and applying for financial aid. And just be aware that we've got a lot of great resources out there. In addition to that, Mila's team is in the high schools doing virtual presentations, some in-person presentations where they do a deeper dive into that entire financial aid application process. We're not going to cover that in this section. And I'm really going to do sort of a high level on comparing offers and the various financing options. But there are some key things that we want you to be aware of. As Mila mentioned, it's really important to have a few different options to choose from and to have a financial aid safety school. And one other thing just to note is we really want to be sure that students do not accept admission or confirm or make a deposit on their admission until they receive their financial aid award letter. It's relatively unusual, but it can happen. I know Mila's encountered some students who've confirmed and made a decision before they've seen that offer. And we just want to be sure that you have all of the information before you so that you can make a really clear and informed decision. So be sure that you don't confirm or make any final decisions until you have that letter. Once you have that offer, and I say letter, that may be sent to the student via mail, but it might also be delivered to the student via email. So it's really important, and the colleges and universities will help you work through the process of having the student sign up for their email, and you want to be sure they're reading it and they're checking in. But depending on the school, they'll get an offer in the mail, or it will be provided to them electronically. And this is really the point where the rubber meets the road, where you really have to sit down and do some careful comparisons and really be sure that you understand what has been offered. I also would encourage you at this point in time, if there's any confusion or the offer that you've received doesn't provide a lot of clarity, or you're unsure whether it's a grant or a loan or the total amount, you want to be sure that you reach out to the financial aid office to really clarify all of the terminology and everything that's been offered. You can also reach out to FAME. We do counseling one-on-one, and we'll sit down, whether it's virtually or in person, to work through sort of that comparison process. We have a wonderful tool on the FAME website that helps you to compare financial aid offers as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions. Be sure to reach out to the financial aid office, because ultimately we want you to understand everything that's laid out in that offer. And we want families to really do a very clear apples to apples comparison of the various aid offers. I've told a story in the past. I had a family member, and this is many years ago now, where her daughter had applied for financial aid, and she got several acceptance letters. She was accepted at several schools, got financial aid offers from several schools. And the mom called me, and she was so excited because this one offer, the total award was $20,000. And she looked at some of the other packages, and they weren't quite to that level, but she was really excited because it was a great amount of aid to help get that bill paid. However, when we started to talk more about the types of aid that had been offered, the school had included a parent loan or other loan as part of that financial aid package. And because this mom was really focused on the bottom line, she wasn't really doing an apples to apples comparison, because the fact of the matter was some of the other schools had offered a much higher amount of grant or free money that doesn't have to be paid back with interest. And if you really looked at sort of the nuts and bolts of that offer, there were other packages that were better, but she was really focused on that bottom line. So you definitely want to be sure that, as Mila said, you're looking at direct costs. So that's the tuition and fees, room and board. And you want to take a look at that cost after grants and scholarships have been deducted. So you want to first do your analysis based on what is my direct cost minus the grants and scholarships and any merit money that's been offered. So that's really that sort of bottom line number that you're going to want to do across all of the various offers so that you get a sense of, okay, what is my bottom line now? From there, that's where you can subtract the federal direct loans that will likely be included in the student's award offer as well. But you really want to start off with direct cost minus grants and scholarships so you know what that obligation is before loans. The other thing is you want to pay close attention not only to loans that have been offered, including other loans, parent loans, but you also want to look at whether or not the student is offered federal work study. Federal work study, it's a great program. It's a wonderful way for students to build a resume and build job experience while they are in college. But that money is not deducted from the bill. That's actually money that the student will be earning while they're in school. They'll find a job usually on campus, sometimes off campus, but they'll be paid that amount that they've been offered through a paycheck. It won't go directly to the actual direct billed costs. Now, that being said, they can use those work study earnings to help pay for some of the other expenses that Mila mentioned, the books, perhaps supplies and books for second semester, their personal expenses, maybe a little bit of, travel expenses, but it's not money that's going to be available to pay the bill. So you really want to be sure that you're very clearly understanding what's been offered. Is it grant, scholarship? Is it loan, or is it a work obligation? Or is it other and you're not really clear what it is and you've got to ask some more questions? The other thing that's helpful at this time is to understand whether or not that award that has been offered is something that you can anticipate over 2 or 4 years, depending on how long your student is going to be enrolled, the length of their program. Is it a first year scholarship that's going to be available to your student that first year, but not in subsequent years? That's a great question to ask the school. And another great question early on is to find out what happens if your student is to receive outside scholarship. How will that impact the financial aid award? All great questions to ask early on. And I think this is a great time to put a plug in for the importance of applying for outside scholarships. The money that the college awards to the student isn't the only source of funding. There are some wonderful scholarship opportunities out there, and they're not just for the valedictorian of the class. There's certainly a whole variety of scholarships out there for a whole variety of different students in terms of their academic abilities, their skills, their interests, and their volunteerism. So you want to be sure that you are encouraging your student to apply for outside scholarships in addition to applying for financial aid. And a point related to that I think is important is applying for outside scholarships isn't something that just happens in the senior year. Once the student is in college, they should continue to apply. And in fact, there are some scholarships that are only available to certain majors that get awarded after they've been accepted and maybe they've completed a year of enrollment. So be sure it's never too late to apply for scholarships. It's never too late to save for college. And so I just want to impress upon you those points. I mentioned that I'm going to be doing kind of a high level overview of sort of comparing and financing options, but I wanted to call your attention to, there's a webinar that we'll be doing on April 14th at 6 o'clock, and it's an understanding and comparing financial aid award letters session. So someone from Mila's team, I'm not sure who's doing the presentation, but they'll be doing a deeper dive. It's Mila, so you can spend time with her again. How lovely. But she'll be doing a deeper dive, more than I am right now, into that comparing offers and the tools that you can use to do that. So please take advantage of that. And we will record it. And again, there are a multitude of tools and resources available on the website. So next slide, Mila. So you've compared financial aid offers, you've figured out kind of which option is best. And again, you've done all kinds of research based on the right fit for the student academically and all of the factors that you'll take into consideration, including the finances. And you've kind of narrowed it down, but you're finding that the financial aid offer isn't simply enough. And what are some of the options that you have? As Mila said at the beginning, or I think Linda said, college is expensive. There's no doubt that it is expensive and costs continue to increase. The good news is there are financing options out there. There is financing available. And even better, the good news is there are some costs that you can control. So I want to touch on some of those things. It's difficult to impact the tuition and fees, and sort of those direct costs, but there are some college related expenses that you and your student in particular can control over time. Now, obviously, as you've gone through the college search process, you can impact the overall cost depending on where the student enrolls. So perhaps they realize that their dream school is just not attainable financially. Perhaps that first year they start off at a lower cost school and then transfer later on. Obviously, you want to ask lots of questions about transferability and is that the right path to take, but you can save obviously on tuition, and it isn't necessarily always a straight path for every student. Some students will start off at one institution and then move to another and perhaps another after that. So it's all about getting to that ultimate goal of receiving that credential and getting a good paying job. So again, think about those enrollment expenses. Housing, this is another place where students can save. So unless there are mitigating circumstances, we strongly encourage, if your student is living on campus, that they live in a double occupancy room, maybe a triple occupancy or a quad, who knows? But whatever they can do to really reduce that room and board expense. If they're living off campus in an apartment, it's a really good idea to have a roommate. If they're living close to, if your home is close to the college that they're attending, perhaps they live at home and they commute. Maybe that's not something that they do every single year, but perhaps in the beginning, that might be an option to save on expenses. The other thing to mention and to keep your student kind of mindful of is that if they are living on campus and they're paying for room and board, every time they leave campus and go purchase a meal off campus, they need to imagine that they're paying for their meal twice that day or that evening. So keep that in mind. Transportation, not a bad idea to leave the car at home. That will save on, gas, perhaps insurance, your mileage, your parking fees on campus. Books is another place where students can save by purchasing their books online, renting them, purchasing used books. Lots of great ways to save on textbooks nowadays. And we've got some great tools on our website to help them find those resources. So those are some of those, think of those as the indirect costs that they can really impact. The amount of time, I think one of our local colleges several years ago did a study on their students and where their discretionary spending was going, and where that extra spending and those costs that you control were ultimately going was around meals and entertainment. So coffee, meals out, entertainment, that sort of thing. That can be a really significant spending leak. So you want to make sure that they keep that in mind. So they've reduced college expenses. Now, what do you do to get the bill paid? Obviously, you've applied for financial aid. Hopefully they've received some scholarships and grants, perhaps some outside scholarships they've applied for. How do you pull this all together to get that bill paid? And I think Mila came up with this years ago, and I love the analogy, and really to think of it as a piecemeal approach. Think of the college financing process as a pie, and that there's multiple pieces in that pie to help you get to that ultimate goal of getting the bill paid. And I think the families that are most successful, they have many pieces of pie and not just sort of a half a pie on each side. They're really, really creative, and they think of a lot of different ways and a lot of different pools of funding to get the bill paid in the end. Savings, this is a huge area that can really make a difference. And in our first presentation, Mila talked a lot about college savings and ways to save. It's never too late to save. And in fact, most of us, those of us who work at FAME and many other parents, continue to save for their children who are in college while they're in college. We do that because in Maine, there are some matching grants available. And so why not take advantage of those grants to help pay that upcoming tuition bill? So working and saving, certainly saving for college, but on the student side, making sure that they're working as much as possible in that summer leading up to the first semester of college so that they can help contribute to those, like I said, the discretionary and those indirect expenses. As much as possible that the student can work and save, that will really reduce the amount that they will have to borrow and the amount of the bill overall. Another great option to get the bill paid, probably my most favorite and the one that I used and relied on the most heavily, is the tuition payment plan. And so the tuition payment plan is a wonderful option that allows you to spread the cost of tuition out over a semester or an entire year. So think of this: if you had a child who needed to have braces, really paying for that full amount up front could be a little difficult, but it was wonderful in my children's case that I was able to spread that cost out over the term of treatment. So think about tuition payment plan is working the same way. There's no interest that accrues on the payment. Usually there is a one-time fee of 500 to, 50, added an extra zero there, $50 to $75, usually a one-time annual fee. And that allows you to spread that tuition out over several months. So that's a great option. A couple of other last options I want to talk about in addition to the loans that the student can borrow as part of the federal direct student loan program that generally, as I mentioned, will be included as part of the financial aid offer. There are also private loans that are available. Private loans are credit-based. The student can borrow it in their name, but they will need a credit-worthy cosigner in order to be able to receive a private loan or to be eligible for a private loan. In addition to the private loans, there are also federal Parent Plus loans that are available. These, once again, are credit-based. There are fixed interest rates. It's a 10-year repayment term, but those loan options beyond just the federal direct loans do exist. Again, we have lots of great resources on the website, on the FAME website, and if you're planning to pursue loans, whether it's a private loan or a Parent Plus loan, you want to be sure that you do your research and be really clear about the obligation. And as I said earlier, piecemeal approach, that seems to work best for most families along the way. So again, reach out if you have questions as you move through the process. And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly is the education tax credits and deductions. This is something that I will say, when my son went to college, I knew about it because of where I work, but I certainly think it would have been an afterthought had I not known. There are some tax credits available to families who do pay for tuition and fees, and they're able to get a credit in that next year when they're filing their taxes. And I think because the timing doesn't always line up in terms of when you're paying tuition and when you actually claim the tax credit, we don't think about those implications from a tax perspective. So there are some tax credits available for families who are covering educational costs. In addition to that, there are some credits available, and there's an interest deduction for the borrower once they begin repaying their student loans. And so on the federal side, there's a student loan interest deduction. And then here in Maine, we have a tax credit called the Opportunity Maine Tax Credit. And this tax credit is a wonderful option for students who are making loan payments who live and work in Maine. And Mila's adding the link to the Live and Work in Maine website, where you can learn about the Opportunity Maine tax credit. So again, tax credits, again, sometimes tend to be an afterthought because they don't always line up as to when you're paying the bill, but you want to take those into account when you're looking at the full financing picture. All right. So as you're going through, as I mentioned, if loans in particular are part of the package, you want to be doing some deeper research about the long-term implications of that debt. And you want to really be thinking about the return on the investment overall, especially, as I said, if loans are needed. But frankly, in all cases, if you're paying out-of-pocket expenses or the student is paying out of pocket, you really want to be sure you're getting a great return on that investment. And there are some great ways to get a handle on this. As Mila mentioned, the college scorecard does have the employment, what percentage of students and their employment and their median income for the graduates. So that's a really good resource to have. The other place that I think is a great place to check is with the career services, to find out what the rates of employment are for graduates. A question around what's the average indebtedness for students who graduate from the institution. That's a great question, and you can get that on the college scorecard. But to have a conversation with career services about placement rates and employability, all great things to explore. Another resource that we like to recommend at FAME, there is a website called Career One Stop. And this is data that comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can actually go in and put in virtually any career, and you can put in the state where you are planning to live, and it will give you the annual median income for that career. So that's really a first step for your student who is pursuing a specific career. They really want to get a handle on what their anticipated income might be upon graduation. And that's a really great resource to look at. I find in pre-COVID, when we had an opportunity to be in classrooms, if I was in a college classroom, if I would poll the audience, for example, a group of 50 or 70 college students, and I would poll the audience and I would say to them, how many of you know exactly how much you will likely earn for the degree that you're pursuing, for that career long term? And I was always amazed how few students really had a really clear sense of what their expected income would be. So you definitely want to get a handle of that. What is the long-term salary opportunity? What are the future job openings? And you can get that from Career One Stop as well. It will give you the future openings for that particular career. What are the earnings and the overall lifetime benefits? You definitely want to get a good sense. On the FAME website, another resource that we have made available is we have a student loan salary debt calculator. So once you've gone to Career One Stop and you have found out what you can anticipate for median income for that career, you can plug it into the FAME calculator. And what it will do, if you put in the annual income, it will tell you what the maximum amount of student loan debt should be based on that income. So it's a really nice calculator to sort of give you a sense of what's reasonable based on that income. The calculator actually works in the reverse, and you can put in the student loan debt as the student is borrowing or what they anticipate that they will borrow. You can put in the debt, and it will then give you the students the salary that they'll need to be able to support that level of debt. So I would encourage you to check out those resources and really do some sort of calculations and some thinking around what is the return on that investment. It may well be that the student may be borrowing a higher amount of student loan in some cases, and that perhaps will end up being just fine in terms of ROI because the salary will be there to support that debt. And so you just want to be really clear as you move through that process and be looking to the future. All right, so just a few reminders, and some of this came from the part one, so definitely check out part one if you didn't join us that first evening. But to kind of take you through the timeline. So as early as possible, and I don't want to panic anyone who's on the webinar right now and you've got a senior in high school and you're feeling like you're kind of too late in all of this. It's never too late to have these conversations. It's never too late to save for college. So certainly as early as possible, if you've got younger children or middle schoolers, It's a great time to really begin focusing on your finances, getting your financial house in order, if you will, and begin having conversations about money and college financing and really prioritizing savings. Conversations that you can have about the future and sort of goals and expectations, what you can contribute, your expectations, both for the student and what they can anticipate coming from you. And again, we love the piecemeal approach. It's a great way to really tackle what can sometimes be a daunting amount of money that you have to pay, but knowing you have lots of tools in your toolbox to get that bill paid is really helpful. Once the student approaches sophomore year, junior year, the resources that Mila mentioned earlier, it's a really great time to dive into those. Certainly the College Board site, Big Future, the net price calculator, it's a great time to be doing that tool. You don't have to wait until they're applying to college. You can go and run some of those net price calculators now if you're curious. You can begin doing those calculations now. Certainly Big Future, the College Board site, getting a sense of what schools, if you have a student who will likely go to school in Maine or New England, getting a sense of those schools in Maine and New England that are meeting a high percentage of need. That's a really good thing that you can be doing now. And again, to take a look at the college scorecard as well. And then senior year, this is a really important time. We hope that you'll lean on us to help you through the financial aid process and the FAFSA completion process. Again, lots of opportunities, whether it's our additional webinars, our recorded animated videos, or our one-on-one counseling, which Mila and her team also offers. They will set up a Zoom with you and do one-on-one financial aid counseling as well. The comparing financial aid offers process, senior years, again, that's a really important time, and lots of great resources available to you. And just to reiterate, that student loan salary calculator, it's a great conversation starter for you with your students. So definitely check that out. There's some additional links there, but I think a lot of those Mila has probably put in the chat. We will make this presentation available as well. So you will have those links and that additional information available to you, but you'll find all of those great resources on the FAME website. All right, so in closing, and certainly Mila, when I've wrapped up, if there's anything that you want to add, certainly feel free. I think the thing that's most important, by starting early and having this information now, we want you to be able to create as many scenarios and options as possible going forward, and really to be able to build that piecemeal approach that we've talked about. As I mentioned, there's multiple pathways, multiple options, and it's not always a linear path. Certainly there are ways that you can reduce costs, and students can reduce their overall indebtedness by being creative and perhaps making different decisions than they had planned right up front. But there's multiple pathways and multiple affordable pathways out there as well. And then this last bullet is probably one of the most important, because we see this where sometimes families will get hyper-focused on that first year, that freshman year, and we're going to get, have our piecemeal approach for this year, but they're not thinking about the future, and whether the student is pursuing an associate degree or beyond. You want to be sure that you're thinking about whatever you're doing this 1 year, you're multiplying by 4 years. And that's particularly important for students when they're applying and borrowing applying for loans and borrowing student loans. They may only be borrowing $5,000 in that first year, or perhaps more, but imagine if you're multiplying that times 4 or more years. Some students take an extra year to have to complete a 4-year degree. So you definitely want to look at that full picture. And then if you have multiple children, like Mila and I both have, multiple children that we had to put through college or are in the process of putting through college, you want to take that into account and be sure that you're keeping planning in place for that younger child as they begin this process. So those are really, I think, some great closing thoughts, especially that multi-year planning. I think that's really important. And then on the last slide, just a couple of quick last resources, our website. Certainly you can email us at any time, you can call us. We also encourage you to follow all of our social media channels. We have a special Facebook group just for parents as well. So please reach out to us for more help and more information if needed.
So next week, we're having both a virtual financial aid information session that would be great for sophomores and junior parents and students. And then our comparing financial aid offers, if you're a senior or a senior parent that would like to really dive into how to do those comparisons. Those events and all of our upcoming events can be found at famemain.com/events. And then last but not least, we've got the social media piece, but I just made myself a quick note. We have some other people at Fame that have worked so hard on our YouTube channel. I can't tell if videos are your thing, just go there. We've got playlists and resources galore. If you prefer to read stuff, go to our website. We try to make sure there's something available no matter your preferred learning style, because you can always call us too. So.
And Mila, the family Facebook page, instructions on how they can join that.
Yeah, go to Facebook and go to college, paying for college for me, ME. And we do have a quick questionnaire just to make sure that we have people who, that there aren't like bots out there trying to join our group. So we really do appreciate people filling out that quick questionnaire, and then we would welcome you to join us and you'll get admitted. We review those every day. So we'd love to have you join us regardless of where you are in the process.
Great. And if you go to Fame Main, and may have already said this, Mila, but just to reiterate, famemain.com/join, you can join our mailing list as well. And our text, they can sign up for texting, they can sign up for email. You'll find all of the direct links to our social media channels there. Anything else about join, Mila?
No, we'd love to have you check that out. And students can join and parents can join. So if you want to join as a parent, indicate that you're a parent and use your information. And if a student wants to join, they want to use their name and their information. We welcome any and all of you.
That's awesome. Thank you both so very much. And as you can see, there is a lot of things to consider and a lot of information and resources available from Fame. So you'll parents and students that are on the call, you'll all be in good hands with this team. Thank you, Mary and Mila, and wishing you the rest a great evening.